So you've got an actual business, right? So this isn't personal investment. This is you buying real estate under a corporation, perhaps owned by a holding company in multiple countries, to generate a passive income business where the asset and the principal keeps pace with inflation. It's physical, it's solid, it can't be stolen. It's usually only going to be seized in like an active war or perhaps a government takeover and confiscation. And it's offering you a solid as 15% dividend, which is kind of standard for business. But within a business, a lot of time you got to reinvest a lot of that and take a smaller salary out. So it makes sense at a certain level, done in a certain way, hedged across multiple countries. And if you were the type of guy that's not going to feel completely secure if all your assets are in you know business and cash and equities where it's all just being held online in the ether. And your psychology is a big part of this net worth game, because the purpose of net worth really is just psychological, or it's insurance against some type of interruption in revenue. That interruption might never happen, and it's just buying you peace of mind. But if it does happen, you can sell off portions of your net worth and put it back into your businesses and various things, right? So if the bulk of net worth is about, because you always want to have your revenue scaling over time, right? And not be living off of going into savings and going down. So if you assume that you're going to aim to have your revenue growing over time, until you die, then real estate's primarily for psychological insurance. So if you feel a lot more solid with properties, this potential business is a great idea. Also, you get some tax benefits too if it's done through a corporation, right? So I would say the second biggest benefit is assuming you buy title insurance, right? Um, Property can't be stolen, can't be locked out of your funds like you could with a bank account, crypto exchange, or the crypto exchange goes down, like guys who lost money holding on FTX. If you're holding in a cold wallet, a lot of people lost their crypto keys. If you're holding gold in a facility in Singapore, there's KYC problems, there's theft problems, there's theft problems transporting the gold in and out. There might be some conversion issues in the future if the American government says, hey, we want to, they're in some depression and they say you have to sell us back all your gold, just like they did in the Great Depression, right? These things can and do happen. Um, but with real estate, you're mostly looking for, maybe there's a seizure in some type of active war. If you've got the wrong passport, like what happened to some Russian people during the war. A communist take, and it's in the wrong country that has unfriendly relations with your passport country. Some type of communist takeover, like that's happened in Latin America, where they could seize foreigner lands, or for some reason removing foreigners from the country, even though Cambodia, which is a communist country, has been a great market for the past 2 decades to invest in real estate. And if you want to learn more about that, check out Reed Kirschenbauer over at Invest Asian, who's been investing there for a decade. They've had year-over-year GDP growth, and in Southeast Asia, you can't own a land per se unless it's through a corporation. You can structure it to where you effectively have control over it, but you can own a condo. You can own it outright in your name. Even in communist countries like Vietnam or like Cambodia, and they're communist, but it's mostly in name only. Like people own businesses, people own property to a degree. Um, Even in China, you can't perhaps own the property, but you have a 99-year lease on it, to where there's a healthy market and you could sell it before you die. And I mean, it's not ideal to have a 99-year lease, but on the other hand, you're not planning on holding it for 99 years and you can always sell it to somebody else. So that being said, you know, countries that are already communists, right, you can own property. So it would have to be a communist takeover and kind of a dumb regime, um, like we've seen in some Latin American countries where they seize foreigners' assets and promptly crush the economy, which I think these days is less likely to happen. Communism is not very popular these days. Um, Now, on occasion, my real estate investor client told me his father had a property attempted to be seized by the government where they were trying to build highways. He had property in the countryside, and the property was worth 8 million. The government said, "We need the property. We're going to give you 2.5 million for it." Right. So even then, he wouldn't have lost 100% of his bag. He would have lost 60% of it, which stings. But he took the government to court, and over 4 years, 5 years, he had the money to go to court and the know-how, was able to get the full 8 million for his property. So even in that case, he didn't actually end up losing money outside of the court fees. And if he had, it would have been, um, he still would have got 30% of that back after the property had, I think he owned it for like 10 years, had, appreciated, and he'd earned some money from rental income. So maybe he would have got back, 50% of what he put in total. But this is a guy who probably owns 40 properties, right? And that only happened to him once. That being said, I think that's the government seizure for some type of highway is less likely to happen in the strategy that I'm giving you, where, um, you'd be looking to buy these sort of high quality condos in downtown, renovate them, rent it to Airbnb, Westerners, right? Or, on the beach in Phuket, where in those cases, they're probably not going to bulldoze condos in downtown to build out a highway, most likely, especially if you're near the business district and you're, in places where you're around other wealthy people. It's more like if you're just owning land in the countryside or something and they want to build something out over there and you got some bad luck. Um, so that's my take on the seizure risk. Um, and I think the overall risk is much less than most people assume, especially having lived abroad for the last 8 years. And I do have foreign bank accounts that I use, um, that I haven't had problems with. I've had more problems with my Canadian accounts, which kept freezing my funds because I'm using my card abroad and the algorithm doesn't like it, or I bought a touch of Bitcoin on an exchange, and took me 3 months to negotiate with the bank, send faxes and KYC documentation and phone calls just to get them to unfreeze the account and reopen it. And I promptly pulled all my money out of that account into my, um, I think I've like 10 foreign accounts, right, in multiple continents at this point, um, where I haven't encountered any type of problem like that. So once you get abroad and you start living here and you realize, okay, there's 70 million people in Thailand, there's 210 million people in Indonesia, and the banking services work. And if you get, you can get screwed on a property if you don't buy title insurance, and the guy's, pretending to sell you a property or something. But if you talk with the right lawyers and you get title insurance, um, you're straight in that regard, and you know your rights and all these different things. I think the risk is much lower than people would assume when they hear Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe or Latin America. Although I would say Latin America is a bit higher if you're talking about Venezuela and Argentina, where they have these histories of strong men coming in and, um, you know, trying to build out a socialist economy and, of course, failing. But, if it's a place like Panama or Mexico or some of the more stable countries, even though Mexico has the cartel problem, it's still, good property rights and things of that nature. Um, Even Brazil in a lot of cases, they did have a problem in the early 80s, but, has been, relatively good property rights for the last 20 years. But certainly Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, Russia and Ukraine excluded, could be some problems with that in the future, if that war extends out. But, you know, um, I'd say your rights are probably good.